And welcome back to the MMcast Masters of Modern podcast. I am your host, Alex Kessler, here with a very special guest, straight from Wizards of the Coast, Mr. Andrew Brown. Hello, sir.
Hello again. I hope I can keep my mantle of most frequent guest on this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, you were one of the first. I think you were like episode 4. It was like me and Jimmy and Glenn in like the first episode, and then I think like second was Marshall, who is one of the editors of the past and the producer of the podcast now, and then Jules, and then you, I think, were the first 4.
Nice.
And then
nice.
And I think like Eugene was the 5th one, and then Ben was 6th, and then that was the last episode Glenn was on, and then Glenn went to work for Wizards, and now of those 5 guests, 3 work at Wizards, 1 makes the podcast, and Eugene no longer works at Tinder, but
he works for Reddit now.
Reddit, right? So yeah, so that was the original 6 episodes, and then we've been able to get you on a bunch since then throughout your whole big Pro Tour run and life as a pro player, and now as one of the key players in play design at WotC.
Mm-hmm.
Which you did just recently, I believe, get a promotion. So I guess to get started before we get into like some of the early things, how'd that go? How's that feeling?
I mean, good. What emotion would you like me to have?
Yeah, I guess emotions. So what does that mean? So you were where, and where are you now in the hierarchy of things making magic?
I mean, really, there's no change. It's mostly just a title and compensation adjustments. That's it, really. Got
it. And then so then I guess for people that are listening and don't know who you are, what are your responsibilities at Wizards on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the technical lead of play design, and basically, long story short, all of the numbers, all like the final designs and final numbers have to go through me, and I'll make the final call on, all of the numbers that involve main sets. I'm not really involved in any of the ancillary products, but if it's a draftable main set, then I'm the final call, the last line of defense, perhaps. I don't know how you want to call it, but quality control. Something like that.
And so that's like power and toughness on cards, costs on cards,
even the designs themselves.
And what they do mechanically. Cool. Okay. Right. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about that, a little bit on what's going on. Before we jump too deep into that, big shout out to TCG Player. There's an affiliate code in the link below if you are interested in buying anything from them anytime soon. Just make sure to click on that link below. Doesn't cost you anything, but we get a small kickback for it, and it's really appreciated. It makes it so we can make this podcast happen. And also make sure to check out our Patreon. We did a whole conversation. Every Patreon episode, the episode gets released a week early, so we're like about a week. It gets released on Thursday morning, and then the actual episode comes out on Tuesdays, and you get a bunch of bonus content. Today, me and Andrew talked a bunch about TFT. He had a hot arcane take, and more. And if you want to hear all that, there's a whole extra 10 minutes at the beginning of each episode there. If you missed last week's, Shivam Bot invaded me and Carson's episode, just jumped into the Discord channel, and we dropped some hot knowledge on why Imagine Dragons is overrated. So a lot of arcane content over the last 2 weeks, but make sure to check that out for sure. And all of our Patreons are super appreciated. Thank you so much for making this podcast happen. And now the last part of this experience is the trivia part of this experience. So for those who don't know, every episode we do a game of trivia. And the way this works is we're making a bet with all of y'all. If Andrew is going to ask the trivia question, our guest is going to be the trivia master, and he'll ask a question. Then in the amount of time it takes for me to answer that question, y'all also have to answer it. And you have to answer it in a comment below. Comment your answer. And then if you are correct, you don't have to do anything. You win. You won the bet. If you get it wrong, though, you're going to hit that like and subscribe button. That's the bet you're making. And I'm sorry if you fail, but that's the rules. And now, because you listen to me say this, you have to follow it. So, Andrew, hit me with your trivia question.
Do you know how to play with the trivia category before and after?
I don't know how.
Okay, so it's going to be a 2-part answer.
Okay.
I'm going to describe 2 things. the last word of the first answer is the first word of the second answer, but they're both going to be magic cards. Okay?
Okay. All right.
Okay, so the question is a 2-mana white vanilla creature that then becomes a 2-color forecast card.
Okay, so the first answer is a 2-mana white vanilla creature, and then a 2-color forecast card.
Correct.
And there's only one that exists that this is.
There's only one correct answer for this.
Okay. Just there's like no way I'm going to get it. Can I ask for rarities?
Common and rare.
Okay. And the forecast, do I know any abilities?
Forecast card.
Just forecast in gold. That's the only thing I know about it rare.
No, the forecast mechanic.
Oh, got it. So it is a forecast rare.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Not a 4 CMC rare.
Yes.
That makes that so much of a smaller amount of options.
Correct. It's supposed to make it a lot easier. It's supposed to be
I'm like,
gettable, not impossible.
How many gold 4-drops exist? Okay. A gold forecast card. How many gold forecast cards? There can't have been that many, and they must there can't be that many. I'm not going to get this. I don't know card names to save my life. These are like random cards that I would know if I drafted any.
All right. Well, this was the hard mode one. The answer is Blade of the Sixth, Pride of the Clouds.
Blade of the Sixth, Pride, and then Pride of the Clouds. Okay. Yeah, would not have gotten it.
All right. I'll give you an easier one. Here's an easier one.
Okay. All right. But wait.
One
first,
modern...
the hard one's the one that everyone has to hit it, subscribe, and like
all
for.
Right.
So, all right.
Here's the easier one.
One
of Modern's premier black planeswalkers and a single green mana protection spell.
Okay. Oh, Liliana the Veil and Veil of Summer.
There you go.
All right, cool. I got one.
Yeah, you got one.
I'll take it. All right. So, but that second one, that was just a freebie for fun. The first one's the reason you have to hit like and subscribe, everybody. And Andrew, thank you for being the trivia master for today's. Those were great. Not surprised that someone who makes games came in with an added layer of game to this trivia game.
Yeah.
All right. I have a list of questions I'm going to ask you. Seen some of you haven't, but I guess really, I think this is going to be the main kind of crux of the podcast is me asking you questions. So the first one is,
sure.
Right now at Wizards, how does development work? What is the process like?
Generally, our process is broken down into, I would say, about 5 stages. So first, there's exploratory, where a lot of the pie in the sky ideas are like, what makes this cool? What kind of plane are we on? What are the themes that we're trying to hit? Very, very, very top level, kind of throwing darts at a dartboard, right? That's stage 1. Next is vision, is when they collect a lot of all the darts, and they're like, okay, which of these darts actually go together? So a lot of vision design is kind of like collecting what mechanics actually work well together to ensure that we can create a good experience. And then after that, there's set design, where a lot of those mechanics get fleshed out into like draft archetypes, rares, mythics. That's when a bulk of the exact card design gets done. And then finally, I said 5 parts, but I mean 4 parts. And then finally, there's the play design part, where for, I would say, the final 9 to 10-ish months of the set being changeable, we on play design, we drafted a bunch, we play a bunch of standard decks, we think about the set for older formats, and we make a bunch of changes to a lot of the numbers. That also means a lot of design changes too. Like if we feel like something isn't meeting a certain goal, we'll happily just throw it in the fire. I would say probably in terms of cards that make the final cut, I would say 1% of them come from vision design. 60% of them come from set design, and 39% of them come from play design.
And then when you're going through that process, how much of what you're paying attention to is for like standard digital play, limited, and then like obviously internal formats like modern and legacy, etc., and then or commander?
So we generally like to lock down all of the limited content as soon as possible, just because it's when we do art, we generally ask for it. It comes in 2 waves, pretty much, the set's art. So since we generally want more reps and more feedback on like the rare cards, cards that affect formats, we generally want to iron out all the commons first, because basically in order to batch out the art, evenly, we need to commission half of the set and then the other half of the set. So we normally do limited first, so that we can basically just get all the art for the commons done. And then once we're done with the commons and limited, we'll then focus on basically what you were talking about, which is just all forms of, constructed magic, whether it be modern, pioneer, historic, commander, standard. We basically think of all of it. In my mind, basically a lot of the best sets have cards for everybody. So like I was saying, we definitely try to hit every single player type and make sure that there are cards that people can talk about, regardless of what format they play.
And in that process, which formats are you currently kind of maybe prioritizing the most versus others, or is it kind of evenly? Where's your focus mostly at?
So my focus is mostly spent on just like ensuring that the rares have a home. One of the recent philosophies that we've kind of adapted, I would say, in the past like 4 years is kind of like the no rare left behind. Like every rare is cool and for somebody. I think Ixalan is one of the biggest offenders of, you just look at the rares and you're like, who is this card for? Like nobody wants to own this. Like, I get that it's like some tribal 5-drop rare, but like, is this even at a rate where people are going to consider this for commander? No. Is this a rate where people will consider this in standard? No. Okay, I guess it's for casual then, but then we're spending a rare slot on it. So like,
1 out of 1,000 casual players may see it if that's the one pack they bought when they're 10.
Right, exactly. And, we can do a lot better than a lot of those old rares. So definitely a lot of my focus is just spent on like, oh, cool, that rare is for standard. Okay, this rare is for commander. And just kind of like gathering feedback from the stakeholders who, play those formats, and, getting their opinions, and then synthesizing that, and then, working with the set lead to ensure that we can get the best possible card for that slot.
Cool. And then, so I guess has that been one of the biggest changes as far as philosophy goes in the last 3 or 5 years in regards to design?
That was pretty big. We've been ensuring that there's like one like very standout strong common of each of a color, which we started to do in War of the Spark. That was another kind of biggest change. But yeah, I think more scrutiny on rares, I think, has been another one of our bigger changes for the better too. I think a lot of our recent sets, you look at the rare sheet, and if you like compare it to older sets, you're just like, wow, there are so many more cards here that I want to own. You look at like whatever Time Spiral or whatever, you're like, why would I ever want to own this card?
Because it's a card Ben Bateman would love. That's
yeah, sure.
They're all for Ben.
Let's say normal people would want to
own. So I guess that's like a kind of a question on is, now taking it so every card that you're printing is like meant to have a home, and anything below that is focused on limited to some extent. Is this, there was a lot of mention of this kind of fire design philosophy of making it so every card is fun. Assuming that's part of that, and that's gotten a little bit of a bad rap because people think it's like the power level spike. Where kind of are you on fun versus power versus difference versus who cards are made for which audiences?
I mean, the way I like to think about it is that cards should be at the correct power level based on, you know, their goals and who they're for. Like I always want to make a card as powerful as it can be to meet that specific goal, right? Like I want to make a, you know, an EDH card that is good at milling or whatever, right? So like I think a recent example I can think of is Maddening Cacophony from Zendikar, right? So like that previously only milled one player, and then we thought about it. We're like, okay, this could be more interesting for, you know, mill EDH if it's at each opponent, for example.
Sure.
So like doing a lot more kind of optimizations like that, and we're trying to make the cards as strong as possible for their specific jobs, while still being reasonable.
So you mentioned Ixalan and you know the design philosophies that kind of changed because of that era of Magic design. You know, that's always kind of held in stark contrast, or like kind of the one of the reasonings for where everything got to eventually lead to the Eldraine, War of the Spark, you know, power level spike era up to, I guess, Ikoria. And now we're kind of, the pendulum feels like it swung kind of back, not all the way to Ixalan, but like definitely more towards the middle between Strixhaven, Magic the Forgotten Realms, the two Innistrad sets. Kind of where, in those spectrums, where has design gotten to, and how are you kind of taking what happened once those cards were in the real world and applying it to design?
That's a pretty hard question, and it's also a pretty hot button question.
Fair. You can always audible out.
Yeah, no. I mean, I do want to answer the question.
Sure.
Like, the obviously, I'm not going to like profess our exact philosophy and exactly like how we think that went. The thing that I will say is that, you know, we're always trying to learn, adapt, and, you know, learn as many, take as many lessons as we possibly can from, you know, what we've done in the past. I guess what I'll say is like I've definitely taken a ton of lessons from like a lot of that era. Certainly there were decisions made. We've definitely learned as many lessons as we can, and like I always constantly reflect on that and am trying to, you know, be better at be the best that I can be at the job. So yeah, it's just funny to me how how people, I feel like people just think that, oh, they just did this and they didn't learn their lesson or whatever. And it's not even like, you know, quote unquote learning your lesson. I mean, like it's you know, reflecting and then trying to do as best as you can in the future.
Well, yeah, I mean, and to y'all's credit, there is a serious time delay between feedback and ability to enact change based on that feedback, right? Like the general life cycle of set design is a year and a half to 2 years before the set is released. So
it is 10 months before when we have pencils down to when it gets released into the wild.
So like being able to take the feedback of a moment and not to mention, like, you know, there's also a history track record before you were even at Wizards where like last minute changes also didn't always end up being positive outcomes. Skull Clamp famously was nerfed by making it a -1 to toughness. So
right.
It's like, even if you were like, oh, people think that this style gameplay is problematic or too powerful, you don't want to make sweeping changes at the twilight hour of a set design. So like, this is something I think we've always done on the podcast say, like, right, is yes, these things may be complaints you have now. Wizards is very apparent about how they're communicating between you and Gavim and Maro, and even like it trickles down pretty far on who's interacting with the community, and it takes time for that to come to come to fruition. I guess second hot button issue, and this one I think is it's becoming a lot more apparent, but this is kind of on that note, is color pie power level, I guess is and if we don't want to talk about this, feel free to say we don't want to talk about it. But an example of this, I guess, is that white as a color pie was in a weird spot 2 years to a year ago, where power level wise in Commander it was very underpowered. That's not to say that like white has been a top tier standard and modern powerhouse forever, from Gideon's to Elsbeth's to Path to Exile to Stoneforge Mystic, etc. But it was always, once you took it to 4-player, its power level kind of greatly decreased. And in the last 6 months, especially, there's definitely been a big push to see like what cool creative spaces that white can play in. Do you want to kind of talk about a little bit what's being done there, what has been done, and how the philosophy kind of changed around the color since then?
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely give you my individual take. I don't think this is the take of whatever our color pie or whatever. I'm definitely not a member of the council or whatever, but I can have some sway. But so generally, whenever I think like the community like complains about something, or talks about how something's an issue, like I always try to be the person who is not as reactionary. Like I definitely agreed with what you were saying. Like there were definitely some issues there, but I think some of our biggest errors have always come with kind of like larger scale changes. So like we've definitely we've added a ton to white, but like I even feel like we've added too much, and we've maybe overreacted a bit in some of our future design, by kind of using like, oh, white's weak, LOL, as a crutch. And
sure,
yeah, like I mean, it also kind of goes back to what I was saying in previous lessons learned, in terms of like what actually gets us into trouble. And I actually think us overreacting to feedback is the main way we get ourselves into trouble. Like Magic as a system has so many years of like doing well, that I don't think we have to rock the boat too much to actually get to the place we want to be.
Sure, that's fair. I think with white, the biggest, it was almost a demographic change, right? Where the percentage of players playing multiplayer Magic has so drastically changed in 10 years that like I can see the need to look at it, but I also agree with you that like swinging the other way. I mean, we even said like when we did an episode being like, why is white good or bad in Commander or whatever? And like our main thesis statement at the end of it was like, Wizards has definitely hurt us because they've said it, and in like 2 years you're all going to hate how powerful white is. Because just like like the same way that kind of like that's a little bit happening to red with Dockside Extortionist, where it's like red went from for a while being the worst color in Commander to having 4 of maybe the most powerful cards in the format, and just those 4 have made all of the other mid-tier power level red cards significantly more important to the format. So it's interesting how that pendulum can swing. And with Commander, it's kind of a like Legacy. Once you open the bucket, it's very hard to put that bucket back.
But yeah, I'm a moderate at heart, so definitely smaller changes is going to get us to the better ending than there's just so much more room for error when you go for bigger sweeping changes.
Sure. Now on to slightly more fun questions.
Those weren't fun.
Those were. I had a great. Yeah. Less maybe less stressful. So over the last 3 years, what set were you most proudest of making?
It's hard. Just because I work like a year into the future, so the coolness kind of wears off.
I mean, if you can't feel comfortable answering, I would also love to hear what your favorite set coming up is, but I figured that would be a harder one to answer.
I like Neo Kamigawa Limited a lot.
Okay.
I'm really stoked for that set.
No, I'll take. I'm most hyped for Nia for the next set. That's always good. So
yeah, it's my favorite set lead.
Cool.
He's some of my favorite limited formats were made by him. So like War of the Spark, Ikoria, Dominaria. This is Dave Humphreys, by the way. He's just a master with the limited pieces, and all I do is just he's a fine weapon. So I just point him in the right direction.
Now on the opposite end,
Mm-hmm.
is there a set maybe you're most disappointed in?
In a sense, I'm disappointed in Kaldheim. I feel like we had a lot of opportunities for cooler tribal decks, I would say. Like, when I was talking about rares, you know, how I was talking about how, you know, we put a lot more emphasis on each rare. So I always have a love-hate relationship with tribal decks because, you know, generally we have to print multiple rares in order to, like, ensure that there's enough scaffolding for a deck, let's say for, like, casual arena play or maybe top tier constructed play. But yeah, we had a ton of opportunities like with giants, with elves, and yeah, we just didn't get there. And that called time was in that it's in a weird lull zone. So like I was the lead of play design for Zendikar Rising, not Kaldheim, and then Strixhaven Forward. So Kaldheim's just kind of in this weird zone for me where I feel like I could have done so much more to help it out. But yeah, other circumstances made sure that I didn't. But I would say that that's the one I'm most disappointed in.
Sure. So similar. I'm just going to do a bunch of best worst questions, and then we'll get to, that'll be the subject of the little outline that people can click through to skip to their favorite parts.
Sure.
Favorite mechanic you've worked on?
Explore.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of variance eliminator mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know that's Magic's biggest strength, also its biggest weakness. So anytime we can kind of smooth that over while making it feel seamless is excellent. So I really love Explorer and cards like Jade Light Ranger.
What's your least favorite mechanic you've worked on?
I'll say this: my least favorite cards to work on are red mythics.
Oh, why? That's interesting.
Red non-creature mythics are just the hardest to make.
Oh, sure. What like? Do you want to delve into that a little bit more, or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like the design space just like isn't that big.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's copy all the spells. Deal more damage. What else does red do? I guess we could make a bunch of combats card. Oh, nobody's gonna like that. Okay, how about I don't know. It's just there's not that much red non-creature mythic space.
Sure, it was kind of always one of the interesting problems with red. To your credit, over the last 5 years, there's definitely been a much higher uptick of good red mythics, but it was always like a joke with the Modern Horizon sets, especially because you were like capped at like only cards printed before Innistrad of like, oh, here's some good mythics in every color, and then red's gonna have Kiki Jiki for the 5th time. Because like Comet Storm, I think, was the only other option.
Right. There's only so many iterations of X damage
right.
you can make cool.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so that was always a struggle.
As a design space, it's the hardest. That's really interesting.
Yeah, blue-green hybrid also sucks too. I hate that.
Blue-green hybrid specifically?
Yes.
Why?
They don't share anything.
They like draw cards and put lands into play, right? That's their main mechanic.
Blue doesn't put lands into play.
That's fair. Oh yeah, hybrid, I guess.
Hybrid cards have to be
both.
Both, yeah.
Okay. So they can like do damage when they attack a player, or they draw a card when they hit a player.
Yeah, you can do that.
That's the design space.
Setting your power and toughness, moving counters. Both of them do that, I guess. They share everybody's favorite keyword, hexproof.
Sure, that's never been too powerful. I don't think that's ever been an issue, especially not in limited.
But yeah, definitely when you think about it more, you get that face that you just had on.
It's like, oh yeah, they don't actually do anything together. That's really so. I guess because in the last two, this was like a thing that happened, right? Is we did our top 10 blue-green cards in Modern episode because we previewed the blue-green Merfolk Lord, the Lord of Atlantis from
Oh, cool.
one of the Ixalan sets, and it was like in contention for best two along with Slippery Boggle. And then like 2 years later, we like relooked at blue green and we're like, oh, the top 10 best blue green cards have been printed in the last year. What kind of like, what was realized between those two moments on just like what blue green's color pie could be, or was it just like enough gold sets?
I would also contend your word best there. What do you mean by best?
Most powerful in Modern.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Not best for the game, maybe, but
yeah. I would not use best in that context.
Most powerful.
Gotcha. Now I understand. We're there.
So what it's changed?
What is this? Is this basically an Oko question?
Well, no, because there's like I'm gonna forget every card name. There's Growth Spiral, Hydroid Crisis. There's the Sacrifice a Thing to not Eldritch Evolution, but the other Neo Form. There's
I mean, when you make Ravnica sets, you make more blue-green cards. So that was a catalyst for more of them.
and then just like, yeah, I guess you went back to Ravnica, and then Oko and Uro were printed. And between those like three happenstances, I guess, and Strixhaven, you've now just like been to enough places with blue-green as a faction plus Oko.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, that checks out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah. We ran the numbers multiple times.
Okay. So I guess the next thing that we have is kind of just like some more design stories conversations. And first we're going to do just some mechanics, and like, these are a little bit more contentious. And then I asked the internet, both on Twitter and Discord, like what was their favorite cards design in the last 3 years or whatever. And so I have a list of them from them, but let's start with mechanics. So just like stories behind them, how they were designed, developed, and anything you kind of worked on them. So let's start dungeons.
Okay. So dungeons were thought of by one of the original hosts, Jules. He was the set lead for Adventures in the Forgotten Realm. Yeah, they went through tons and tons of iteration. One interesting piece is that Adventures in the Forgotten Realm was basically our first set where like bulk of the design was done in the pandemic. One of my last memories of the office is seeing Jules play with an early prototype of Dungeon, which was heinous, by the way. It was like you had 4 choices every single time, and I was like, yeah, that's not going to be reasonable at all. And he's like, but we're just playtesting. I'm like, get it out of here. But that's just me being the negative, the realist in the room.
Local curmudgeon.
Yeah, we'll say the curmudgeon realist. Yeah. Yeah, Monk Realist is actually my my invitational card. Yeah, so yeah, a lot of it was done via work from home. But yeah, it was definitely really tough. I think we were mostly successful with the middle dungeon and the sacrificey dungeon, but I think we definitely missed a little low on the long dungeon. Not enough people went through it in limited, and obviously there were definitely some color imbalances with red being too strong in AFR limited and some of the venture cards being a little weaker than they should be.
Sure.
So overall, I think dungeon was mostly a success for such a parasitic mechanic, but I would definitely do some things differently if I could. I mean, no, 2020 hindsight vision.
Sure. What kind of got you to pick only 3 dungeons? Where did that? How did you whittle down in that direction?
Mostly just grokkability. Like,
okay,
it should feel different, but it shouldn't be an impossible choice.
Sure.
So 3 is definitely a good number for. Hey, it's interesting. I can choose different things sometimes, but it's not like impossible.
Sure. I will say, so I have a Varus commander deck built, and I have completed every dungeon at least twice in one game, which has been cool to do.
Nice.
Maybe I should have won by the time I got through all three, for sure. But it was definitely, I think as far as mechanic, it's really fun. All right, next one then. Mutate.
Mutate was a hard one. We were very much restricted by the card Paradise Druid in Standard, just because it was a hexproof card that you can mutate onto.
Okay.
Which was not super fun to do. So we definitely had to tone down a lot of the like runaway mutate designs that didn't have to attack.
Okay.
Like if Paradise Druid is a human, I think like the average power level of a lot of the mutate designs just goes up.
Interesting. So, that's fascinating. So like there were times in design that everyone was beating themselves up being like, why is this an elf?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was made a year ago. So
yeah.
Sometimes you're just like, well, couldn't do anything about that.
So, okay. So Paradise Druid ended up being, so like a lot of the Porcupine Parrot stuff, the static, you tap it or whatever, or the ETB stuff kind of just had to get whittled down.
Yeah, pretty much. Yep. Like any mutate card that like kind of like dominated the board while not like having to attack or whatever was definitely an issue, because then it's just hexproof.
Sure.
And we don't like hexproof cards that run away with the game.
Which is, I guess, kind of where Ward came from, right?
Yeah. Also, speaking of Jules, yeah, that was Jules and I were the progenitors of Ward. I'd always been a fan of using those like slight hexproof variants on a bunch of cards, and then eventually both of us were like, yeah, we should just do this. And then we made a presentation to the group, and then the keyword got adopted. So I guess I lied to you previously. I've made one mechanic. It's Ward, but that's
nice. Hey, I mean, if you're going to make a mechanic, one that's just like evergreen and available all the time is a mechanic to make.
Sure.
Adventure cards.
So these are you're talking about the Eldraine adventure cards?
Correct.
Any sort of DFC mechanic is always a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Like people love having to do more with their cards. So adventure definitely lets you do that really easily. Obviously with some hindsight 2020, some of them maybe should have been a little weaker, but for the most part, I think they ended up fine. Like there are worse cards to be the strongest in the environment than Bone Crusher Giant and Brazen Borrower.
Yeah.
And yeah, Lobstark Beast 2. That, although that one's probably one of the more nefarious ones to be the stronger one, just because it pushes out other stat lines. But
so that's interesting. So of the three, because of those three, like that's the one that's seen the least amount of play outside of Standard, right? But versus Brazen Borrower and Giant, which see a ton of Modern play. So of those three, you think because of its just effect on what other cards could see play?
Yeah, I mean, Stomping Giant has that effect too.
Sure.
Or what? Bone Crusher Giant. Sorry.
Yeah.
I always call it Stomping Giant. Yeah, I mean, it has that effect too. It's very punishing against 2 toughness creatures. Especially like if you, it basically like cut out a lot of the X2 or X1 creatures without ETBs from Standard. Which. That is definitely a large subset of stuff, but it's not as large as the subset that Lovestruck Beast blanks.
Why is that?
The just 4/4s are not as good. 3/3s are not as good. Right, like those are the cards we want to be good.
Sure. It's more that it shuts out there are a ton of cards that a 1 mana removal spell or a 2 damage removal spell for value are going to kill, but that removal spell is going to exist in some format semi-often. The just 3 and 4 power things aren't worth it anymore is a much larger slew of cards. Got it. Static ability planeswalkers.
Love them. I think one of the main lessons I learned from War was we shouldn't do detrimental static abilities on planeswalkers. But yeah, I think now that we kind of have that unlocked, our design space with planeswalkers is just so much bigger, and we get to make niche planeswalkers, which is really cool, a lot easier. So like the Tyvars of the world, I think those definitely have a cool audience. So yeah, huge fan.
And like, so when you say that, what makes it more capable to be kind of niche?
I mean, we can just kind of add the build around effect to the static. It's just basically it gives us another kind of tool in the toolbox. Your elves cost one less. Nissa could say your elementals get +1/+1, right? Like we can kind of keep it simple, keep it also like short and appealing and in your face too, without and with planeswalkers we want you activating different abilities at different times because like that's what the card type does. So it allows us to keep like a constant build around instead of having to put a build around in one of the abilities. But then again, we don't want you to activate the same ability every single time. So it just makes it a lot easier for us to make like interesting build around planeswalkers.
Got it. So basically, they allow you to like create game states with your planeswalker, but then still give choices every round. So it's not
Correct.
just like a thing. Like you're not basically playing an enchantment that can be attacked. It almost is the opposite of what it appears, right? Where normally if you have a planeswalker where it's almost always correct to do the exact same move every time, it basically just is an enchantment that can be attacked. But by making them have an enchantment like effect, you can then make their other ability something that can be modular.
Correct.
That's cool. Okay.
Yeah, like Nissa Ravane is technically an elf build around, but not a fun one, right?
Sure.
Because you're just so priced into activating the ability.
All right. On the more contentious side, companion.
The one thing I'll say about companion is I'm a big fan of the pay 3 to put in your hand.
Sure. The mechanic escape.
Generally, I think it's a good mechanic. Flashback mechanics are cool, especially when you have to like spend resources for them. It's really kind of a play design dream, really, because there's just so many numbers you can change, like mana cost, number of cards, escape reward. Yeah, there's really a lot going on there. So big fan of escape.
Of the different flashback variants, aftermath, flashback, escape, which one would you say is your favorite?
Probably escape. Just because like, the cost to exiling more cards, I think is like actively fun. Obviously it's pretty spiky in terms of like, okay, which ones do matter, etc. But I think in terms of like pure gameplay, what's better, I think I like escape the most because it has the best checks and balances system.
Sure. You can fight against it. All right. So these are specific stories about specific cards. The first one is from Martial Magic. Nicol Bolas Dragon God. That's the War of the Spark, Nicol Bolas.
Okay, sure. That card was made by Dave Humphreys. I remember the day when it just had abilities, and Dave and I weren't happy with it, and I was just over by his desk, and he randomly pitched the idea to me, what if he's all the planeswalkers? And I was like, I don't know what that means. You're gonna have to be more specific. And he's like, yeah, so let's use a War of the Spark. Well, let's use a static to mean that he can just activate all of the abilities. I'm like, A, that's cool. B, can digital even do this? And yeah, apparently digital could, and yeah, that's how we got to Nicol Bolas Dragon God.
All right, this is from Big Dan Bergie, the red Kaldheim god. That backside is her horn that you can discard a card to exile two cards. Bergie.
Oh, big fan of Bergie. Yeah, Bergie's nickname. So when we were making that card, it's we often called it Runaway Steamkin with Experimental Frenzy on the back. which is kind of what it is. But yeah, no, that card basically didn't change. It's very rare. I would say only about 2% of cards ever go from set design through play design unchanged. But that was one of them. The horn might have been 4 mana for a minute, but I think we rightfully moved it to 5 mana, and I think it's really well balanced now.
Sure.
And even shows up in Commander, shows up in vintage
No.
cube too. So it's a real home run of a card.
Yeah, definitely. Like a slam dunk that didn't break any format, I think is like exactly where you want to be.
Yeah.
Storm Kiln Artist.
Storm Kiln Artist. Oh, yeah, this was 3 mana for the longest time. And at one of our like final meetings of like, hey, should we actually, really take a closer look at the rates? Are we okay with this? Somebody convinced me to move it to 4 mana, and I think that was definitely for the best, given some of the combo decks in standard. With cards like that, I really like, fragile-ish kind of 3-card combos, especially for standard. I think those are really, really fun and interesting for arena. But I mean, that one's super click intensive. It takes a long time, which are definitely good arguments against it, right? Like,
Sure.
generally, when people assemble those combos, like I want them to have a overwhelming advantage or win super quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But this one definitely takes a long time, and in retrospect, I'm kind of glad it's cost 4 mana now.
It's seeing play in like CDH, right? So like
Right.
like if it's there, it's probably at a good power level.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean it's a serious combo card, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, and just like swinging with a 7/2 in a format where no one's playing creatures is a lot of damage.
Sure. Why not?
Yeah. Plus, who people don't need life for ad nauseum. That seems bad for everyone. Expressive Iteration from Fleegler. Oh, and Stormkiln Artist was Jonathan Arnett. Sorry, I'm forgetting putting people's names out there. But yeah, Expressive Iteration, Fleegler.
This was... I actually came up with this card. With Strixhaven, one thing I kind of wanted to hit is coming up with what I call Lightning Helix cards. Just kind of like iconic, powerful, like relatively easy to grok 2-color cards that are like, cheap-ish and format staples. So that was my goal with Iteration, and it, I did it.
Was there any that you missed on for the other classes?
Yeah, I think the other big shot was the Decisive Denial. It was originally Fight and Negate, but we changed it to Leak, Negate, and Fight. I mean, obviously didn't show up as much, and hindsight, maybe it should have been the full Negate, but that was another one kind of in contention there.
Shark Typhoon from Trent.
All right. So I definitely have a good story about this one. So Shark Typhoon was in the set, was in the file, without cycling, and with a different name. And so Dave Humphries is also the lead of Ikoria, but he's not very, let's say, knowledgeable in the way of the memes.
Okay.
So I was on him about getting some either a Snakes on a Plane reference or a Sharknado reference into Ikoria, because, those are dope.
Sure.
So yeah, basically I was like, you have to make these tokens flying sharks, and trust me, the creative team and the artist will get this right. And he's like, okay, I trust you. And then and then to make it stronger, we added the cycling. Sure, why
not? First Day of Class from Cody Nye Enthusiast.
Oh, nice. I believe I also came up with this one. I wanted to basically make sure that the red lesson creatures were a little bit better. So basically, First Day of Class makes your spirit summoning into Thundering Giant. So it's primarily for limited, but I know it definitely sees play in some combo decks in other formats, which is cool for a common.
Yeah, and so I guess that's a question. Like, at what process for Learn was the decision to like add the looting effect as a worst case scenario backup plan added, and like how did that process happen? Because that's a big, like, the looting is one of the reasons First Class is good, right? Like, it's played in Dredge where you can discard and then get things that then have haste that turn.
I mean, basically it was, I think, having safety valves is good. Like I was saying It's also another variant smoother mechanic, which, like I was saying, I'm a pretty big fan of. But yeah, I mean, it also just makes it so that drafting isn't so stressful. Like it makes sure that you don't have to draft a lesson in order to feel good about playing your learn card. So I'm generally a big fan of the buyout clause.
This is from House of Cards. Malakir Rebirth.
Malakir Rebirth. That's the
flip land, mono black.
Yeah. I came up with this card. Nice. Somebody likes this. Perfect.
This card sees like a ton of play. This is like a real card.
Yeah.
Love this card.
No, yeah. I mean, I loved working on all of the DFC flip lands, and apparently I'm the biggest proponent of supernatural stamina in all of R&D. So anytime I can put it on more cards, the better. And I think it's just a generally fun effect for many formats. So I'm glad that someone put this on their favorite list.
Just a creature comes back when it dies, and you get extra ETB effects. And this is also a land. Yeah, this card's dope. I've put I could not have more Malakir Rebirths. The number of decks I've just put it as a one of into, just because if this Tarmogoyf dies, it won't die, and my opponent will be sad, or it's a land.
Yeah, it's also a fun card to be strong too. One of Magic's strengths is hidden information reversals. People always call out Giant Growth as being awesome, and I think this is kind of along the same level.
Right, where it counters a lightning bolt, it does the extra damage than you expected, and makes blocking hard, and this is a card that all of the things I made were ruined by this open black mana.
Oh, look, interesting decisions.
Turgrid by Tom Jensen.
Oh, nice. This is a fun one. Oh damn, more Dave Humphreys stories, I guess. But Dave Humphreys is one of the most stubborn people in all of R&D, to his benefit and detriment at the same time. But tons of people told him that nobody would like Tegrid because some people don't find that gameplay fun, and he always countered back with, "But there are some people who absolutely love it," and I definitely respect him for having a lot of those stubborn viewpoints, and I think Tegrid definitely came out fine, and apparently people love it, so great.
And then the last one is from Will Sheridan, Charming Prince. Before we get to Discord, I guess. Will Sheridan, Charming Prince.
Charming Prince. Okay, I got a fun one for this one. So Javier Dominguez's invitational card. We didn't have a lot of time, so we kind of had to basically choose we kind of had him choose a card from Eldraine. So basically one of the first cards that we showed him was Charming Prince, and he was like, "Oh, this is cool. This could see older format play, and this could, be a card in Standard." So basically that was the first card he had his eye on that he chose, and we actually we had an art revision of him as the Charming Prince with the trophy in his hand. But then, after we spent more time balancing Charming Prince, he's like, I don't feel like this is going to meet my goals of, being a format all-star. So then he's like, okay, I'll just switch to Fervent Champion. But he could have been Murderous Rider too, but he chose Fervent Champion.
Of the three cards, that would not have been my choice.
Yeah,
that's fascinating. Okay.
I'm glad we got an interesting story as the last one.
Yeah. So that's the last of the Twitter ones. We have Discord ones next, and then oh
my god,
I know. You said pick cool cards. These are a little bit more controversial.
I mean, anything on a banned list, I'm gonna pass. You already know this.
Literally, all 5 of these are going to be problematic then. So we're just going to skip this section. So it was Underworld Breach, Oko, Mystic Sanctuary, Golos, Teferi, and Urion. My Discord is a lot spikier than my Twitter. All right, so
your Twitter is very wholesome.
Yeah, that's on purpose. So everyone, you should follow both of us. Me, I'm at Kess Wiley. Andrew, where can people follow you on Twitter?
At Merc_lurker.
It was in the little show notes at the beginning. But all right, so I guess for like the last section, and this might be passes as well, because I know this isn't really the side of the world that you focus too heavily on. But Modern Horizons 1 and Modern Horizons 2 development, how, from like your knowledge, how did they differ between how the first one was done and how the second one was done? And how do you think they went? And were there any surprises on what cards were good or bad from when they came out versus when they were out, including reprints?
I mean, the biggest difference was, one, there was most of the work was done in-house, and then two, there were external contractors that were given like a month of work to do
for the second one.
Yeah, for the second one. And unfortunately, that's all I can really say on that.
Sure. Pioneer, can you talk about Pioneer a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, Pioneer's awesome. I think it's definitely a good opportunity for us to make a new format that people are going to care about, and I think, TBD on, tournaments and such, but like it's definitely, I think, a format that everybody should keep their eyes on.
So yeah, so that's all I have. Thank you so much for joining. But as always, it's great to have you on. We, when we get another chance to have you back on, we'd love to do it again. Maybe after Kamigawa and the best set or the favorite set you've worked on in a while. I'm excited to see it. Always a fan. Apparently always a fan of Dave Humphrey's limited environments, because everyone you listed is like hot fire and all about it. So
yeah, it is fiery, and I'm a big fan.
Sick. And where can people? We already said Twitter, but and beyond just like every Magic set that comes out, where's the best place for people to find you on the internet?
I mean, just Twitter.
Okay.
You can definitely feel free to. I will post polls intermittently, and those polls actually do inform some future discussion of Magic. So if you have an opinion, you can definitely feel free to express that on my polls, because real talk, I do talk about them with the other important card makers at Wizards, so that is it's an active way to affect the game.
Also,
but don't be snark.
But it's a snark free zone. Also, if anyone ever reads any of the articles on the Mothership that are like a card and then all the different notes the different designers gave about it, Andrew is a bro in all of those, and normally has the better comments. And beyond that, make sure once again check out our Patreon, hit that like and subscribe button. If this is the first time you've seen this podcast, we do Modern content on a weekly basis. We'll start doing Modern live streams starting in January, where Ben's going to play Modern against friends every Sunday, and we are also do our Commander stream every Monday night. And you get this episode out early if you do the subscribe to Patreon. So that is a Thursday morning bonus thing that you get. If you had listened to this episode a week early, you would have heard us talking about Arcane and TFT, which was a really fun conversation. So definitely still check that out. It is up there forever. And then the episodes come out every Tuesday, audio and video on YouTube. So thank you so much. Thank you, Andrew, again for joining
no problem.
the podcast as always. And we'll talk to everyone next week.